So Moving Together was initially intended to be a dance piece. So that was kind of the idea. We would work with Bronwyn on her research and create a short dance performance that would somehow sum up what she had researched and found really. Sorry, I haven't got the academic knowledge here, but kind of the output for the research. Then the pandemic hit and we couldn't do what we planned to do because we couldn't meet in person. So we changed the project entirely, basically. So we still wanted, it was really important for us to work with people and to work with people's experiences and not just have it on paper. So for us, it was really important to find a way of reaching people that experience loneliness. That was the first step. So we decided we would call them and have a phone conversation because several of the people that we wanted to be in touch with wouldn't have the technology to have a Zoom call or something fancier. Now that we all do, but phone was definitely the most immediate way of communicating with people. So we interviewed them over half an hour, depending on how long they wanted to talk as well. And we prompted them with several questions just to invite them to share about their experience about loneliness, but then also the opposite. And we would ask questions like, what do you associate with loneliness? What is the journey that you're walking through? Or talk me to a journey that you, when you have experienced loneliness, a situation maybe, or a place that you found yourself in while you experienced that. Or we ask about what the color might be, the color of loneliness. Where in the body do you feel loneliness? Where does it sit? Located? What does it make you feel? So really quite sense-based questions as well. Or what is the sound of loneliness for you? And so all of those questions, their responses, we recorded, which then that recording went to our composer, who created a short soundtrack for a recording. So sometimes you would use elements from the recording, so verbatim text, sort of from the interview. Sometimes it was just the music, it was the music inspired by the interview, but we ended up with a short soundtrack per interview. Then our dancers would pick one of the soundtracks that they would want to work with. We had 30 in total. So they then picked whichever ones they wanted to do and created a short choreography on that. Overall, that then was filmed, the choreography with the soundtrack in a location that was chosen, was filmed and made into a short dance film, 2 minutes long, no longer than that. And we called them video gift because for us it was really important not to just extract something from people and tell us about your experience and goodbye. It was really important to honor them as well with their experience, because the reason for us, certainly why we wanted to do Moving Together, was to remove the stigma of loneliness and to address that in society, and that most of us feel lonely in some way, shape or form. Especially during the pandemic, I think we all have noticed that is so much more of an issue for all of us, unsurprisingly. So we felt really that it was important for us to give a gift back to them, and we did that. And it was, well, I might talk about that later more, but just to see the response of how people received their gifts back and what they shared with us, how it was reflected back to them through a creative output. Let's keep the word output. And from then onwards, we were like, well, this is beautiful. We have 30 different gifts now. But overall, it feels like there's so much more story. And each of the gifts is for a specific person, but it's also relevant for anyone else. So it could be, anyone else could be seeing themselves in the gift. But still, we felt like it was really important to create more of a narrative. And so we worked on a short film, an 11-minute short film, and used all of the recordings, so snippets from each of the interviews, to tell more of a narrative-based story around loneliness. So I'm Anja, and I'm the artistic director of Justice in Motion, which is a physical theatre company based in Oxford, but we tour internationally, nationally at the moment, and globally through the internet. But yeah, we raise awareness about social injustice issues. So anything from poverty, modern slavery, over to loneliness and isolation. And we do that through a exciting mixture of dance, theatre, film, poetry at times, aerial acrobatics, parkour, anything that feels right to be used in order to communicate about those issues and stir debate and discussion about it. The Moving Together project, which we did in collaboration with Bronwyn, was kind of a little bit new for us. Well, it turned into something quite new, which is on a digital platform. So film, it was, I would say, our first venture properly into film. So we filmed our work, but we have never purely created for film. And so that's been quite exciting.
So my name is Bronwyn Tarr, and I'm a researcher and also a dancer. I guess research-wise, I would count myself as a human scientist, and I kind of fit into the cognitive and evolutionary anthropology categories, psychology categories, quite interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary in terms of having many kind of homes at a university. And my work has really been focused from my PhD and then since on the psychological but also physiological effects of moving together and dancing, specifically in synchrony. And this was quite serendipitous. I hadn't researched dance before. I had studied other animals and social behaviors from a kind of zoological perspective. And then I had a chance at Oxford to kind of bring all of that scientific training to start asking questions about humans, and specifically something I really loved, which was dancing. So the types of questions that I tend to research focus on the kind of ingredients of experience that people might have when they move in synchrony together, for example. I'm really interested in the powerful consequences of that synchronized movement in terms of social connectivity, in terms of feeling like you belong. There's a kind of click that can happen when you experience synchronized movement with others. A sense of collective joy. And this has been thought about a lot from anthropological perspectives, but my approach was empirical, and I would do experiments with people and get them to dance in sync and not in sync. And I also found that there's some really interesting physiological effects, like to do with pain threshold, where we get these benefits from dancing with others and specifically dancing in synchrony with others. So with that background, I was starting to think about ways of applying this work in a more diverse and interdisciplinary way. And I was interested in collaborating with people outside of the lab, so to speak. And so I applied for a Torch Knowledge Exchange Fellowship and had this opportunity to start exploring a new area to take this research, into the world, and to try and work with people that had experience with dance from very different perspectives, specifically dance movement therapists. And I found myself thinking about the opposite of what it was I'd been studying, which was connectivity. And there was a lot of interest in loneliness, with a minister of loneliness being appointed. And so this idea that maybe loneliness could be something where all of this experience that I had been accumulating could come to bear, to try and kind of design from the bottom up some kind of an intervention or some kind of understanding about how to tackle loneliness, given everything I'd been learning about these ingredients of connectivity, which I thought perhaps might be the opposite of loneliness. And with that, I also got a theatre seed fund, and this was where I approached Anja. And this project, Moving Together, was originally born, although at that time in a very different form to what it ended up being, as Anja said, in terms of film format and a digital format. And the idea was to collaborate with Anja and her creative team of dancers, musician, filmmaker, choreographers, to really try and explore this topic for the purpose of public engagement, but also for various other kind of output goals. So yeah, that's the kind of overview of how we came to begin moving together the project.
Yeah.
It's a really good question, and I think it is something for people that are interested in engaging in public engagement collaborative projects like need to think more about, perhaps more about than I did when I started this project. I had a kind of on paper idea of the outcomes that I wanted, or which I thought would be feasible in the time we had and with the money we had. And that was kind of threefold. I thought, okay, my priority needs to be a research output. I was planning to pilot an idea for a design of a study that would be based on workshops that I could then use to hopefully run a much larger project, in the following year or the years to come. Secondly, I wanted to make sure that the project had some meaningful public engagement. So I wanted real people to come to these workshops and to interact with a local charity for loneliness, Archway, which I had already made contact with. So I wanted to make sure that there was a strong connection with people that were working on the ground, so to speak, on the frontiers of loneliness and what it feels like. And then thirdly, this idea of a performance output, if we want to call it an output, that was the kind of third prong to the aims. And I suppose initially I understood when I approached Anja and told her about this project, I kind of had an idea that the research part would really be my focus, and that the public engagement would be a shared focus, and that the performative, creative output would be Anja's expertise, for which I would really be relying on her to kind of actualize that in a really meaningful way based on her experience. I guess, we did talk about that in some sense at the beginning, but the actual details about what each of these three things would end up looking like, before we knew COVID would happen, in truth, it was very, very kind of, there was not a lot of details from my side. And I think that was a flaw in the project, which would have made it more productive for me research-wise, was if I had known going in exactly what it was that research should and could look like, as compared to being new to the area of research and piloting everything for the first time myself. Because remember, my background was in the lab, running experiments, and here I was, launching myself into qualitative research, into interview-based, engagement with participants, and into a collaboration with an arts company. So there was a lot of new learning happening from my side that meant that those original outcomes or outputs, were going to have to shift, and indeed they really did.
Yeah, I guess there was also, because it changed so much, so what we initially set out to do had much more of a research focus, I guess. And then with the pandemic and shifting everything online, it reduced the opportunity for the research within that significantly. So we always tried, and we had so many conversations, I remember, about, where can we get back to the research? How can we link back to it? How can that serve the research and serve you in that sense as well? We know it's a great piece and it's a great project and we love it all, but then, we didn't want to forget about the research at all. And I guess for me, I came in, all of our projects, we do in collaboration, actually, pretty much all of them, most of them. That's either in collaboration with different practitioners that come from a very different angle. So, for example, we've never done I'm not a parkour athlete, and yet we invited parkour athletes, which is a very different community to the theatre community. So there was a collaboration just on the pure creative front, for example. But usually we work with academics, researchers, with people on the ground. We have partner organizations that, say, on a show about modern slavery, we will be working with Hope for Justice, or Unseen, or Stop the Traffic, or organizations that work on the ground. So that's really important for us. So we understand it and really understand the problem, understand the subject, understand the challenges, understand what can be done, or maybe not, what are the issues, or what is creating the issues, and so on. So each of the projects we approach almost like an investigative journalist. So we go in and we do rigorous research, and that's really important for us. now I find it really important to have that element in our productions. So it's not just entertainment. They are entertaining and they're, you know, exciting to watch, but there's always something more to it, because we try to inspire people to become active. We try to engage them in conversation. That is why we're doing it, to get people to think, to respond, to react to what they see somehow. And so one thing we've noticed is that there is a certain kudos as well that comes with a researcher, for example. So if we were to make a piece about loneliness, then that's a lovely dance piece, and then that's it maybe. But having the kudos with the researcher, where we can back it up almost, that these are the findings, that's, you know, somebody even outside the company has done lots of rigorous research, and that has influenced what we're doing. And therefore what we're putting out here is has that added value almost, right? But also it really helps us in the creation process to just cross-check and fact-check and like be in there and go, is that truthful? Is that appropriate? First of all, is that sensitive enough to the topic? Is that communicating what's truthful to the research as well? Or are we just you know, imagining things and then spreading lies almost, because that's what we're thinking is the case, but maybe it's not. And so we don't want to give malinformation. So for me personally, it's really important to have the experts in the room with us on a topic. Yeah, that's why.
Yeah, I mean,
one of the reasons why I was always excited to have Bronwyn on the table there, and even more so because obviously she's a dancer as well. So there's a lot of shared understanding straight from the off.
Yeah, I mean, I think in many ways that made made the fact that there was such vagueness at the beginning, like it still worked, was because we had some really important ingredients of collaboration in there already, on the basis of the fact that I knew Anja already. I had been a dance student in her classes, and even danced, you know, in her cooperative company, you know, for a performance. And so we had a working relationship outside of the collaboration in question, and that was really important. The other thing, though, from the kind of researcher perspective, which remained unresolved through this project for me, was that when you're launching a kind of public engagement activity or project like this, which involves collaboration, and indeed, I think this project couldn't have been done really without some form of this kind of collaboration. It was totally necessary for the integrity of the public engagement to have Anja's input as much as maybe she felt it was to have mine, you know, for the integrity of that performative output. There's sort of two approaches, I suppose, to thinking about what that public engagement is going to involve and entail. The one is that you can be showcasing existing knowledge and research, for which it's, you know, I think this is what Anja was speaking to. It really helps to have like a researcher in the room, or someone that has some experience in the content that could inform the material that then translates through this creative process. And that was really successful in this project, I think. The part that's separate to that but can relate is the knowledge generation. The active research or primary research, when you're trying to ask a new question for which there isn't yet a clear thing to disseminate, you know, you don't really have the answers yet. And so I was trying to kind of do both of those things in this project. My hope was to share my prior research on synchrony and on connectivity with the performers and with Anja in such a way as to make the piece, you know, especially that final dance film, there was a lot of that represented. But then also in the process of creating that content, the hope was to be trialing, you know, and gathering data from participants through questionnaires and through interviews, etc., that would inform a kind of follow-up longer term study to actually ask some questions about the lived experience of loneliness that seemed to be still up for asking. And that was the part that really got derailed by COVID, because although we could move online and we could do a number of, say, you know, questionnaires, we could ask people to take part in interviews online, we didn't have the same kind of physical interaction with them that would have allowed me to test some of my before and after questions that I'd hoped to get data on. And so that got totally stifled from the need to lock down and socially isolate. However, there was this remarkable thing happened where, as a researcher, I was far less agile in my capacity to respond to the changing situation, whereas Anja and her team were epically capable of adjusting and pivoting the projects in record speed and going digital basically. I mean, it felt like it was immediate. I know it wasn't. It was a painstaking period of decision making and planning, but as compared to me, who had to apply for ethics amendments, and there were all sorts of implications to changing who I was going to be talking to and how. Just practically, that made me much slower to kind of adjust. So another really important ingredient to success, I guess, in these kind of collaborations is really being flexible and being able to know when there's some part of the project that is going to be able to proceed, even if there's another part of the project or intended outcomes that is being kind of stifled or held back for various reasons. To be honest, like I don't really know what happened. It's just a bit of a blur. I mean, it was such a difficult time. I mean, nothing about the last year has been normal for anyone, right? So much was up in the air and quite reactive. I mean, there are certainly some kind of take-home lessons, I think, which I think we stumbled into by virtue of the fact that we already knew each other and had danced together. And so we had a kind of working relationship or a kind of open communication that made the collaboration probably a lot more smooth and ultimately more successful than it might have otherwise been. And so I think it's very helpful to go into collaborative opportunities like ours or others that are similar, ideally knowing your partners and developing a relationship in advance of deciding to collaborate together. I think for Archway participants, that was also perhaps quite important. I mean, I spent a lot of time getting to know the participants and talking with the foundation before this collaboration could kind of formally launch. And that's because, you have to build trust. I think you have to build a personal relationship with stakeholders so that, especially if it's members of the public, they feel like it's worth their time and that they're going to be heard and that they will be contributing to the project in a way that's meaningful. So having an open line of communication and, an actual working relationship in advance is very, very helpful. I don't know, Anja, if you want to add anything on that point.
I second that. It's good to have that relationship for sure. There's been a lot of different moving parts to the project, as you say, that lots of different stakeholders in that. So even within the participants, we had participants from Archway, we had participants from outside the wider community, let's say, that we interviewed, and then we had those that participated in the workshops, and then we had those that participated in the flash mob. Mostly they overlapped, but also not everyone. And then we had people watching and audiences, and then we had from the KE workshop even there were, and that was completely in your control, not control in your remit, to talk to the therapists as well, music movement therapists and other researchers as well, bringing us together with that. Whereas I took care of the collaborators within the creative realm and tried to have a conversation with them. But early on, we said as well, like literally weekly Zoom catch-ups, which Bronwyn attended as much as she could, which was great, just so she could hear what's happening with the project and what's going on and listen into our creative process. Because what I know, my brain, can go very easily, very far. and I will try communicate it along the way, but often, or sometimes it's not possible because it goes so fast. And it's something I've noticed that writing it down is really important so that people can follow the step. But even that I did quite often in order for my core team, for example, the management team, to understand where we're at. And even then, months into the project, they were like, what is it with doing still? I was like, how come you don't know? I told you so many times and I've shared it, and to the point where at one point I was just like, I'm just going to make a drawing how things link together, because there's so many different moving parts and they change, and I made that drawing and put it out there, and everyone went, okay. It's like weeks and weeks of me talking that didn't quite cut it, but then a drawing just made sense. So it's finding the right way of communication with each of the people that you're talking to.
I think dividing and conquering is really important. In this case, there were so many moving parts, and even though the origin of the project was me, and I approached Anja, it then really did grow into this web of interconnected stakeholders and participants. And so I was not going to be capable of maintaining the same kind of degree of connection with all of the parts involved. And so Anja was great, because if I talked with her, then I knew that the creative side and the whole team of creatives would be, represented, and would be, those ideas and that dissemination would then happen through that kind of branch of the collaboration. And that was really valuable, even though I did try and attend a lot of their meetings, so I could hear kind of for myself how the creative side was going, and input little bits of feedback, when it was relevant. It was quite good to kind of know, okay, Anja's in charge of this side of things. And then in a way, I was the connector between Anja and Archway, just because I had developed those relationships. I held also some of the kind of codes of conduct with regards to ethics and how we approach who we can talk to in what way, what kind of data we can gather, even record, how we manage that. So connecting, I sort of saw myself sitting in between the participants from Archway with, people with lived experience of loneliness and the creative team. And I think that worked quite well. So it helps to kind of know who you're going to get into partnerships with, but also then trusting key people that can open up parts of that network. And, I had a couple of people at Archway that were really instrumental and opened up that whole network for me. And so that was very, very helpful. Another really important ingredient is, trust. I mean, you have to be able to trust each other to kind of get on with doing whatever it is you can get on with doing. So, I really, and I hope Anja feels it as well, I really felt it was important for Anja and her creative team to have the space to do what they are really good at doing. And even though it ended up being a lot about kind of reflecting research knowledge that I maybe had already accumulated kind of prior to the project, the way that would really happen was very much in her hands with her team. And I learned a lot from watching how they operated and how they explored those topics, as well as how they interpreted what our participants were saying, because that was where there started to be quite a big difference, really, between my kind of lens and the creative lens. And that was vastly interesting, and probably could be kind of research output in its own take. There was the real type of kind of participatory observation that ended up happening in this project, without it being intended to, in that by the end, I spent time learning dance moves from Anja and the other dancers that reflected the interviews that I had done with these participants on the phone. And that was a very interesting full circle, to embody physically the movements that came from these recorded interviews that we had done right near the start of the project. And that really wouldn't have been possible without letting Anja, trusting Anja and her team to have the space to do that interpretation in their own way, and not to kind of expect it to look like I would have done with my research glasses on.
I think that was really key about our collaboration as well. And for me personally, it really felt it worked beautifully. I've done, I say, lots of collaboration beforehand, with varying degrees of success or not. They're all really, really fruitful and really important and really good. But I think for the first time in a collaboration with a researcher as well, I felt the complete freedom to be the creative in the partnership as well. And I know Bronwyn is incredibly creative and skilled and a dancer, you know, so like I would, from any of the people that I've worked with so far, I would have maybe been able to expect it from her to have those creative ideas, and she was completely holding back. She knew, this is what I'm inputting, and you know, whatever creatively you do, I might give my opinion to it, but yeah, she never led us into direction, which was fantastic, because that allowed us to be completely, free in our creative interpretation of it as well. And yet she supported everything we did solidly, like even to the point when, you know, I needed something written up and she said, I'll do that, no problem. She wrote that up, or I've just drafted an email to all of the participants. I'm like, great, I don't know when I would have gotten around to doing that. So I could already just copy and paste, and it just felt, over the months, it literally felt so organic and homogenous somehow. It just, I don't know, a give and take constantly. And I really valued Bronwyn's input throughout the process as well. It helped me form my creative ideas. Yeah, which wouldn't have been the same without her in the conversation with me.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's really nice to hear that from Anja now, you know, and the project isn't over yet by any means, but I mean, I think a recommendation I would have for people that are launching on their collaborative, you know, public engagement journeys from the start is to try and perhaps do a bit more work than I managed at setting out the goals for yourself as a researcher, and understanding the goal for the collaborators as well. And you know, there's this opportunity when you're working with creatives, you know, and say theatre companies like Justice in Motion, for you to commission a piece where you're like, well, this is the idea, this is the content, this is the knowledge that we've acquired through our research practice. So please, can you interpret this and create a piece that reflects that? And I can have input in it, but off you go and kind of do that, as compared to more of a collaboration. And the collaboration is much more interesting. It's also much more sticky and difficult to maintain that balance. And I definitely feel like I didn't actually do it very well for myself all the time. My research got lost in this project, but that was for the most part because of COVID and because of significant restrictions on physical practicalities that I did not have control over. And there is a lot of content that ended up being generated from the project that was unanticipated, which is now sitting in my database that is yet to be kind of filtered, you know, yet to be explored and yet to be kind of looked at from more of the traditional lens of a kind of research perspective, which perhaps I should have prioritized more from the beginning and known that could and should have worked from the start, and then I would have felt less lost as a researcher in the collaboration. That said, you know, I think that's because I was trying to explore a new field, a new set of methods, you know, qualitative research versus quant. There was a lot of new stuff going on for me in this project, and it's remarkable, I think, and it speaks a lot to Anja and her flexibility, that the project was a success nonetheless, because, you know, there was far less of a kind of clarity on goals and from me at the start than I think there could and should have been. And I think we got really lucky. I think that the final output, which has just been remarkably rich and very successful in terms of the number of people it's reached and the long-term kind of plans for the project, which I'll let Anja share more about, you know, all of that I think is a combination of us having good communication through a lot of volatility and being quite flexible at the end of the day with how the project was going to play out. It would have helped to have been much clearer on goals, I think, from me in the beginning. But at the end of the day, you also have to be really flexible because collaborations are like a life of their own, right? So you have to let them live and breathe and develop through the time of the project. You can't dictate too much from the start.
I think with collaboration as well, it's really important to set the expectations from the off. Like you could go in as a researcher and say, oh, I'm, as you said, commissioning someone and I want to see like I'm in charge here, this is my project, and we're having a creative output, that's it. Or us as a theatre company, we could say, this is the piece we're wanting to do, or to create, and we take the expertise from a researcher on board, which is a very different hierarchy, straight from the off. Whereas I think we went in, yes, Bronwyn approached me, but very much so, what do you think this could be? And I was like, I don't know. I was kind of a dance piece. I was like, yeah, sure, we can do that. It's fine, easy. So, you know, it didn't excite me as much initially, even though I was really keen on working with Bronwyn. So I was like, yeah, that sounds good. Loneliness does work within the context of the company as well. But the twist it took, in a way, was so much more key, and that really made it rich, as you said, and that made it a really important project for the company. And so I think we went in same level almost. Yes, Bronwyn's research dropped out. I do hope it'll come back in through other means, even more so. So as I say, it's not finished, not at all, but or not complete, let's say. It's finished for the first part, but it's not complete. But we were there equal from the off. And I think that was really important. And that having been given that trust was key as well. And that, I said it earlier, gave me freedom to create, gave us as performers the freedom. And if that trust isn't there, it's really, really hard. I've done various collaborations. One, for example, we were literally commissioned, and it was a great piece and you know, a great opportunity to work, but it was literally, we had the material and we created the script based on the material and we made a show, but we rarely had any contact to the academics themselves. And I would have wished, for example, there was more conversation, but we had complete freedom and they were very happy with what we brought back to them. That on the one hand, and then on the other hand, I did a research project with someone who we went in as equals in a way, and it was very clear she's the creative, she's the research director and I'm the creative director, and yet she had so many ideas herself creatively, which were really good and really exciting ideas, but it almost was squishing my ideas, and so therefore I never had enough breathing space to really allow it to grow, and it was like a constant battle almost, unnecessarily so. But as I say, I've felt sometimes, why was I there? Like literally, why am I here if already what you have is really great and there's great ideas? So am I just supporting your ideas? If so, I'm not needed. And then that becomes a really challenging conversation and relationship. Again, what we created was fabulous, and I think we were all very proud of it. But it had an unnecessary challenge within it that wasn't necessary, let's say. Whereas this collaboration, I say, it was just free flow and gorgeous. And we were, I think, again, Bronwyn wasn't too precious about her research. Yes, super precious, of course, because it's the research, but it wasn't that she was clinging onto it either. It was like, okay, no, this isn't working right now, let it roll as it needs to roll. And yet I always kept on thinking, okay, I really want Bronwyn to benefit from it and her research to, you know, be served by that somehow and be nurtured by that. So there were so many moments in time where I'm like, Bronwyn, could this be an area of additional research, or could this be something that could interest you, or is that an angle you could take, or just not as just as a suggestion or an offer, or, you know, do you want us to collect more here so that it could be useful for you, or just constantly being aware to not lose one element that was important for me.
I mean, impact is such a catchphrase in a lot of research grant applications and a lot of kind of researchers. But it's also a bit of a checkbox. Like, I think you have to kind of demonstrate that you've had some kind of impact. And there often isn't much thought about what it really means, I think. In my case, I interpreted impact in this project as being some kind of change from before versus after for the participants from Archway that would have been taking part. And my initial plan to kind of capture that impact through surveys that would be kind of piloting some kind of structure that I was interested in using fell away. So I lost the capacity to assess impact in that original intended or more traditional kind of sense. However, we interviewed participants on the phone, and there was also follow-up opportunities when we shared the gifts with participants to witness their reaction, and several people allowed us to film them receiving and watching the gift for the first time. And so there is an opportunity there to kind of get a sense of individual impact in a kind of qualitative sense for those participants at least. For wider participation, you know, we did the kind of standard thing where we would have questionnaires at the end of the flash mob. You know, after watching the film, there's a chance for people to kind of give feedback on their engagement with the project and whether or not it made them think differently. And I think it's a bit fuzzy, but for me, at the end of the day, a successful kind of indicator of impact would be people kind of thinking about this idea of loneliness in a different way than they might have done before, or just thinking about it at all as something that they could really articulate and not shy away from and not feel alone in. And I think that, you know, looking at the number of views that the film has does give some kind of indicator of how many people might leave those 11 minutes of exquisite dance film, you know, content that Anja and her team ended up, you know, producing. They might leave it with hopefully more questions than answers, but the point is that there's you know, the whiteboard of their mind when thinking about something like loneliness is populated with something. How we really go about measuring that as researchers and knowing for sure, I'm not totally certain. It's much more difficult in some respects when you're not physically in a place and you can't capture people afterwards and have a focus group or talk to them. But there's been a lot that Anja and the team have done to kind of maintain contact with participants and also to have the project grow and continue kind of completing itself in multitudes of ways. So yeah, I'll hand over to you, Anja, if you want to tell us more about that.
Yeah, so impact measurement, that's the hardest thing to do in the arts. It's hard within research in itself. I find it's even harder within the arts because it's so subjective and it's so hard to measure. Yes, of course, we can measure how many people have seen the film, how many people have engaged in the flash mob and so on. So we've got the quantitative data. However, on this project specifically, the qualitative data is so much more key. And as Bronwyn mentioned, the Zoom reveals, we call them. So on Zoom, we gave them their video gifts individually. We did a couple of the conversations, Bronwyn and I together with the participant, and literally we were moved to tears because it was just so touching and so beautiful, and just the response and the extra creativity that was blurring out from people as well, as they shared poems with us and whatnot. It was just endearing, really endearing. But then further on as well, I had a few conversations with participants which were significant, I would say, and where I could literally see the change in the person watching it. So one lady, for example, she, and I'll try to keep those short, but as an example, one lady, she saw her video gift and she was moved to tears and just said, you know, just to know that a whole team of professionals just made this for me, and it's now available on YouTube and it has my name on it, is so special. Because one of the things with feeling lonely is that no one sees you, no one cares about you, no one ever does anything for you. Whereas here's a whole team of professionals that are doing this just for her. And then it impacts others as well. Somebody mentioned that now that I hear everyone else talking about loneliness, it makes me feel less alone already. So that is an impact, right? That people see, actually, you know, I'm not alone in this. Yes, I might. Yeah, well, knowing there's other people lonely makes me less alone, was one of the comments. And then one lady as well, that was fascinating. So we had, we made 2 video gifts for her. So some people had a couple because like the loneliness and the opposite part were so different. And so it was beautiful to show both facets. And she wanted to remain anonymous throughout the interview and the whole stage and the whole process, up to the point where we did the reveal of the video gift. And then she just shyly asked me, she's like, could you maybe put my name on it after all? And I was like, okay, why is that? She's like, because I'm noticing that I've been hiding all my life. And right now I'm kind of going through this whole process that I actually need to step out into my true identity and who I actually am. And this is almost part of my process of transformation and of, you know, allowing myself to be who I am and not shy away from it and remain anonymously hidden somewhere in the background. But I want to be proud of who I am. So we changed, we put her name on it, we released it with her name on it. So that was important for her. And then another one participant, one guy, that was heartbreaking and so special. I was on the phone with him for nearly 2 hours, I think, and we both cried and broke and laughed. And it was just the most beautiful experience, because he had gone through a lot of pain and a lot of trauma throughout the years, but especially this past year in lockdown. He hadn't been able to leave the house at all because of health issues as well. And so he was literally stuck. And seeing the one video gift about loneliness, he was just like, this is exactly how I feel. Just seeing you scream, seeing this, it's exactly what, like, I see myself in it. But then even the opposite of it, the second video gift in his case as well, captured so many aspects of his identity and who he is, and like even where he comes from and where his heart longs to be. It was just phenomenal. And it just gave him that journey of reconciliation almost with himself, to say, yes, this is part of me and this is part of me. And both is really important aspect of my life. But even more so, with those video gifts, I have an opportunity to tell my friends and family that I don't know otherwise how to tell about how I feel. And this just sums it up. And there's no way that I could have ever communicated it that beautifully and that impactful. But here I've got a tool almost to explain what's going on. And it's a tool for him to communicate, but it's also given him the agency to create and to influence something with the creative process. We wouldn't have made those video gifts without his interview in the first place. So it's just a real beautiful shared process. And I think that's impact, just seeing that. And that brings me to what's happening now with the project. So we concluded it with this first edition with the Archway Foundation. But now we've been invited to do the project at the RAF Benson, so on a military base, and had some funding from the armed forces to interview people on the base. And we're right now in the middle of it. So we have just done all of the interviews, and we have most of the soundtracks ready, and then we're going into the choreographing process as well. And again, the question is always, how can we best serve the community, and who do we interview? And we were fortunate enough to get people from all ranks, like literally a 6-year-old girl that's a daughter of an army officer, as well as a high-ranking officer, and everyone in between, the wives or spouses of people, and so on. And just again exploring the facets of loneliness and the facets of what it means to live on a base, and what isolation might be caused with that, or what connectivity does that actually bring, and so on. So again, we're exploring, we're there tasting, testing, and being nurtured as well. And hopefully those gifts again can nurture the people that participate in. And then we've just had an invite as well to potentially take the project next spring, to a town where we would work with local dance organizations and local people it's part of their recovery plan, almost recovery out of lockdown. So they're doing something about poetry, they're doing something about music, and something about sculpture. So they wanted to bring in something about movement, and heard about the project, and we're like, yes, this would fit probably really, really nicely. So again, we'll amend and adapt to that community and see what needs to happen with it.